Greeks versus Trojans, 1194 BC. Trojan War, the 10-year siege of lies. You clicked to witness a war where truth was a blade and deception built the pyre of a city. Night settles over the Aegean like a cloak of hammered bronze. Wind combs the masts. On a distant hill called Hisarlik, archaeologists would one day count 9 buried Troys, layer upon layer of flame and rubble, proof that a single city can die more than once. But long before that discovery, a prince walks beneath cedar torches carrying a promise that is not his to keep. He smiles, a queen's bracelets whisper. A kingdom sleeps. And somewhere across the sea, an oath spoken to prevent bloodshed begins to sharpen into a spear. There is a rumor that the war did not start for love at all, but for something colder, older, and far more dangerous, an agreement sworn by men who never intended to keep it. The tide rises. The drums of oars begin, and in the gray between truth and story, a single lie slips from a palace like a thief in the night, never to return. Now we follow that lie across the water, because the first man to see it clearly will decide who lives, who burns, and who is remembered. He oathed the chained kings. They will later say it began with the most beautiful woman in the world. That's a neat story, clean and quick, the kind that fits in a single line of poetry. But the truth is heavier, and you can feel it in the room where it happened. A Spartan hall flickering with lamplight, the air smelling of olive wood, leather, and wine. A crowd of young lords pretending they aren't afraid of one another. There is Helen, yes, with a gaze like moonlight on a sword edge. But at the center stands Tyndareus, the old king. A man who understands the worst kind of war is the one that starts at the wedding table. He has a problem no blade can solve. Dozens of powerful suitors, all of them capable of burning Sparta to the ground if he chooses poorly. Listen closely. You can almost hear the first hinge of fate move as Odysseus, poor but cunning, steps forward. He offers a cure that tastes like honey and iron. Every man, he says, should swear to defend the chosen husband, whoever he is, against any threat or abduction. A simple promise, light as breath. The suitors nod. Hands rise. Vows are spoken. Most people never knew this detail. The war that would drown a generation began with an oath crafted to stop a murder. But here's the shocking truth. Vows have long shadows. Years later, when Paris of Troy, golden, confident, led by gods or his own hunger, walks through Spartan corridors and departs with Helen, that old oath wakes like a sleeping wolf. Menelaus, wronged husband and king, doesn't need love to sharpen his will. He needs precedent. He needs the signatures of men bound to him by words, and he has them. Across the Argolid, palaces breathe in and out with the work of messengers. Bees hum in courtyards. Bronze flares in sunlight. Agamemnon, high king of Mycenae, receives the summons and sees not a brother's tears but the architecture of empire. Grain roots, tribute, prestige, compliance. A war can reorder the world if you survive it. He calls for ships. In Troy, the sea is a silver knife, and Priam studies it from the citadel walls. He is old enough to know that youth mistakes blessing for approval. He loves Paris. He doubts him. He trusts Hector. He fears the truth that no father can amputate a son's consequences. Counselors argue beneath banners that smell of cedar smoke. Some say return the woman and the dowry. Others say the gods have chosen Troy for glory. Anxiety coils around the city like a second wall. The first fleets rise from 100 harbors. Wood groans. Sailcloth snaps. Oars drop in perfect rhythm. The world narrows to the length of a deck, and the hunger of men who know they are part of something too big to stop and too uncertain to understand. The Achaeans have numbers. The Trojans have walls. And between them stretches water that has carried both traders and raiders to fortune and ruin. There is a moment while the ships assemble, an afternoon that smells like pitch and sea salt, when a man could still turn back. A carpenter sets down his adze and looks at his hands. A young lord tries on a helmet that does not yet fit. A messenger stares too long at the hills he grew up in. Fate is a road that only looks straight when you've already walked it. In the moment, it's a web. On the beach at Aulis, the wind dies. The sea goes slack, a mirror that refuses to tell the future. The fleet can't move. Priests murmur. Warriors crack jokes that taste like fear. Agamemnon learns the first lesson of command. Power without a path is just weight. He sends for Calchas the seer. The priest arrives with smoke in his hair and the kind of gaze that makes men feel seen through. He speaks the language of patterns, the grammar of birds. He tells the king what no leader ever wants to hear, that he has offended a goddess and that the price to move the wind is not gold, not promises, but something far more private. The tent shrinks. Silence swallows the room. And this is where everything changed. Because whether you believe the dark version sung in later halls or the gentler one shared by modern scholars, the lesson is the same. War demands tribute before it offers passage. Agamemnon learns that the ledger of conquest begins in his own house. He pays, the wind rises. The fleet moves, oars punch the sea. Dolphins follow like omens. The sky clears into a blue so honest it looks like mercy. Men laugh again because it is easier than thinking. They sing loud off-key, while their eyes flick to distant horizons. At night they tell each other the story that makes fear feel useful. That they are going to punish a thief, to restore right order, to burn down the lie that was carried out of Sparta. In the dark their voices drop. No one speaks of the other story, the one in which they are marching toward a wall that outlasts heroes, toward a city that has died and been reborn so many times that even its ghosts have practice. The first dawn on the Trojan shore arrives like a blade drawn from a sheath. Mist lifts. The sand is packed and pale. The surf whispers in half-phrases. Scouts signal from skiffs. The Greeks do not rush this morning. They are men of prey and patience both. They form lines not out of neatness but survival. Shields lock. Spears angle like a field of winter grass. Chariots test the hard sand and carve crescents. And from the city rise the bronze-bright figures of defenders, their crested helms swaying like red grass in wind. Odysseus steps down into water up to his calves and studies the shoreline with a builder's eye. He sees not just enemies but angles. The beach curves. The dunes hide approach. The river mouth to the north could serve as supply. Even now the war is becoming a plan. Achilles stands barefoot, letting the foam bite his ankles. He is younger than the stories will make him, older than he wants to admit. And in that tension lives an animal grace that unnerves friends and terrifies enemies. Beside him, Patroclus laughs softly and nudges his shoulder. It is a small thing, ordinary and human, and it may be the last ordinary thing they share. Hector watches from the gate, one hand on the stone, the other on the strap of his shield. He memorizes the face of the shore because he knows he will dream of it, whether in victory or in grief. Behind him, women climb the stairs with jars of water and shy children. To defend a city is to defend 1,000 small futures, and he can feel their weight without turning. Clash comes not like thunder but like rain, one drop, then another, then a storm. Skirmishers meet and scatter. Arrows rise and fall with the sigh of 1,000 breaths. Chariots surge and recede. The first man to fall is not a king or a champion, but a sailor with a broken sandal thong who looks surprised when the spear finds him. The battle has begun and it doesn't care about rank. What happened next? No historian expected because the poems touch it only lightly, the way a singer's hand skims a harp string. The Greeks test the shore defenses, then pull back, deliberate measuring. This is not the quick raid they intended. The sand is a book, and by noon both sides have learned how to read it. The Trojans learn the rhythm of the landing. The Greeks learn the distance of the walls. Somewhere in the wash of noise, strategy is born out of confusion. A council follows in the largest tent, sweat and leather hot. A room that smells of men and maps. Diomedes argues for forward camps. Nestor polishes a story until it gleams like advice. Odysseus draws lines in the sand and wipes them away, because plans must be humble in the face of living opponents. Agamemnon listens and chooses, not because he is certain, but because hesitation is a luxury command cannot afford. They will fortify the beach. They will not chase glory into the teeth of walls that eat heroes. They will grind. This is the first payoff, the first truth paid in full. The war will not be won by a single day's courage, but by 10 years of endurance, deception, and stubborn, brutal logistics. If you want more of this secret history, told without the dust, with the clang of bronze and the ache in a commander's chest, stay with me. And if you hunger for the whole campaign, for the duels and the midnight councils and the lie that will roll on wheels, subscribe, like, and leave the battle you most want to see below. You're about to witness this war the way it was never told. Outside, the sea keeps its own counsel. The Achaeans raise palisades, driving stakes with the rhythm of men building a second shore against the first. Fires bloom at dusk, a ring of stubborn stars around a dark center. In the city, Priam walks the walls and measures how long a man can keep a promise to his people, before that promise begins to cost their sons. Trojans light lamps that burn like patient eyes. Mothers pull children close and pretend not to listen for the distant drums. Most people never knew this detail. Even in the earliest Hittite letters whispering of Ahiyawa and Wilusa, names that echo Achaeans and Ilios, you can feel that this was not merely a story, but geography with teeth. The straits, the trade, the narrow place where East and West negotiate. Wars are never only about faces. They are about corridors. Night deepens. Along the ditch, sentries stamp cold feet and speak softly so as not to wake homesickness. In the Greek camp, someone laughs too hard at a poor joke. In Troy, an old nurse ties a red thread around a baby's wrist and prays. Across the plain, torches stalk like slow animals. Owls stitch the darkness with small, efficient deaths. Shore of iron, sky of arrows. The sun rises red over the Aegean, as if the gods themselves have dipped it in blood. The Greek ships rest like sleeping beasts along the shore, their prows biting into the sand. Smoke rises from last night's fires, thin, tired, uncertain. Men wake stiff, sore, silent. The first night on enemy soil always tastes like metal and regret. Across the plain, the gates of Troy stand sealed, golden in the morning haze. The walls are alive with motion. Archers in crimson cloaks, watchmen with spears flashing in sunlight. The city seems to breathe, confident in its height, daring the invaders to come closer. Yet beneath that calm, the Trojans feel it too, the slow tightening of fate. Achilles stands at the edge of the surf, washing his hands in the icy foam. The waves drag at his ankles like ghosts. Behind him, Patroclus adjusts his greaves, watching his friend's reflection twist in the water. "You're thinking of the man you'll kill first," he says lightly. Achilles almost smiles. "No," he answers, "I'm thinking of the one who will finally stop me." By midday, the air hums with tension. Scouts return breathless, dust-throated. The Trojans are forming lines beyond the Scamander River. Hector at the center, chariots drawn up in disciplined ranks. The Greeks answer in kind, shield to shield, bronze flashing like waves. From a distance, it looks like two storms crawling toward each other. Agamemnon rides along the front, voice sharp as steel. "No man returns until this beach is ours. If we fall here, we fall nameless." He raises his spear, and for a heartbeat, every sound in the world disappears. Then, like a shattering dam, the two sides crash and sand explodes under hooves. Arrows hiss through the air, their shadows flitting across shields. The first contact is chaos, shouts, splintering wood, the guttural sound of metal finding flesh. Achilles charges, his myrmidons tight behind him, black armor slick with seawater. He moves like something half human, half storm, too fast, too deliberate. Spears glance off his shield. Blades find no opening. Men fall one after another, and his name begins to ripple through the lines like fire in dry grass. But fate, as always, waits with its knife hidden. Out of the Trojan ranks rides a young commander, Cicones, a prince of Dardania, proud and untested. His chariot slices through the crowd, wheels hissing on sand. He meets Achilles head-on, lance poised, shouting something no one can hear over the roar. Achilles sidesteps, catches the shaft beneath his arm, and in one fluid motion drives his sword through the man's chest. The boy's eyes widen, the world going silent around him. Achilles steps back, breathing hard, his expression unreadable. He wipes the blade, and for an instant the shore seems to hold its breath. But here's the shocking truth. This single kill, meaningless in the scale of war, will echo farther than anyone expects. Because high on the walls, Hector sees it happen. He watches the life drain from the Dardanian prince and feels something cold slide into his chest. He knows that courage alone cannot hold the gates forever. As the day drags on, the Greeks press forward, building mounds of corpses and sand. Yet every advance meets arrows raining from the walls. The sun climbs higher and men begin to stumble, half blind from sweat and glare. Agamemnon calls for retreat, and the horns sound across the plain. It is not defeat, it is calculation. They fall back to the beach, leaving behind the wreckage of ambition. Night comes quiet and strange. The wind carries the smell of iron and salt. Around the Greek fires, laughter sounds forced, too loud. Odysseus sits apart, sketching lines in the sand with a burnt stick. "They'll never give us open ground again," he mutters. "If we don't build something that can't be burned, we'll be corpses by winter." Diomedes leans close. "Then we build," he says simply. And so under the moon, the Greeks become engineers. Stakes are driven, trenches dug, towers raised from driftwood and plundered timber. They build a fortress on foreign soil, a camp that will one day be called a second city, grim, functional, born of necessity. The hammering never stops even when men collapse mid-swing. Every blow is a promise we are not leaving. Inside Troy, a council gathers in the dim throne room. Torches sway, throwing gold light on old faces. Priam sits silent while the voices clash like swords, some demanding peace, others calling for vengeance. Paris stands at the edge, his hands trembling on the hilt of a decorative dagger. "We cannot give her back," he whispers, "not after all this." Hector turns to him, eyes dark. "Then you had better learn to die for her." A hush follows. Outside, thunder rolls over the plain. The gods, it seems, are watching closely tonight. Dawn returns with vengeance. The Greeks finish their ramparts. The Trojans march out again, proud and furious. A clash at the river. Spears glitter. Men vanish beneath horses. And suddenly, amid the chaos, an omen. A falcon drops from the sky, clutching a bleeding snake. The soldiers freeze, staring. The bird flies toward the Greek lines, then veers back, wings crimson. Both sides whisper the same thought. Someone has angered the gods, but fate had something else planned. In the confusion, a small Trojan unit slips behind the dunes, finding the Greek stores unguarded. By the time the alarm sounds, fire is already roaring through the supply tents. Smoke rolls over the beach. Panic spreads faster than orders. The Greeks scramble, dragging barrels to the surf, shouting, cursing. Agamemnon watches helplessly as half his grain turns to ash. For the first time, the invaders understand. The enemy is not afraid of them. The siege will not be swift. The war is beginning to think for itself. As night falls again, Achilles walks the shore alone. The flames have died, leaving black scars across the sand. Patroclus approaches quiet, carrying a jug of water. "They'll write songs about this," he says softly. Achilles looks at the horizon. Only if someone survives to sing. And somewhere beyond the campfires in the whispering dark, a figure moves. A spy from Troy, barefoot on the sand, eyes fixed on the Greek ships. He pauses, listening to the waves, then vanishes into the night. What happens next? No historian expected. Because by dawn, the Greeks will discover messages carved into their wooden shields, written in the language of Troy. Warnings, threats, promises. Someone has walked among them while they slept. Someone who knows their names. The sea murmurs, patient and endless. The stars fade behind rising smoke. And far inland, the walls of Troy gleam faintly, like teeth in the dark, waiting for the next blow. Wrath like a thunderhead, it began with silence, the kind that comes before a storm remembers its own name. For days, neither side moved. The beach smelled of rust and ash. Broken spears jutted from the sand like ribs. Men waited, sharpening blades that no longer gleamed, whispering prayers to gods who no longer answered. Even the sea seemed to hold its breath. Then came the insult, a messenger from the temple, dust on his sandals, eyes hollow from what he had seen. He carried word from the priests. Agamemnon had taken the daughter of a seer as his prize and refused to release her. The gods had noticed. The camp murmured like a hive, some in fear, others in fury. Achilles said nothing at first. He only stared into the fire, jaw tight, hands folded on his knees. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, too calm. He offends Apollo, and thinks the sun will not burn him for it. The plague came within a week. It moved through the tents like smoke through cloth. Horses dropped first, then men. The air turned sour with death. Every sunrise brought more pyres. Priests wailed prayers until their throats bled, and still the sickness did not stop. Only when the seer Calchas named the truth aloud, Agamemnon's blasphemy, did the king agree to give the girl back. But he took something else in her place, Briseis, Achilles' companion. That was the moment the storm broke. Men still tell of the rage that followed, not shouting, not the wild fury of a soldier, but the slow, deliberate wrath of a man who has been betrayed by his own cause. Achilles faced Agamemnon before the council, his eyes cold, his voice steady enough to frighten gods. "You take what you did not earn," he said, "and call it tribute. But when the spears close in, it is my blood you spend." Agamemnon's reply was a sneer. "Then stay out of my war." And so he did. The Myrmidons sealed their tents. Their fires went dark. On the beach, their armor sat untouched, collecting salt and dust. The greatest fighter in the Greek host withdrew, and the balance shifted overnight. Hector's scouts saw the lull first, and the Trojans pressed forward. The plain that had belonged to the Greeks began to belong to no one. The first morning without Achilles, the battle line broke before midday. Ajax fought like a man trying to replace a legend. Diomedes bled from 3 wounds and kept fighting. Odysseus tried to hold the flank with tricks and courage alone. But courage is not armor. By nightfall, the Trojans had pushed them back to the very walls of their new-built fort. Inside Troy, hope tasted like victory for the first time. The city rang with the sound of celebration, drums, flutes, laughter spilling down marble stairs. But Hector did not smile. From the highest tower, he watched the fires on the Greek shore flicker like dying stars. He knew the danger of easy triumphs. His father's words returned to him. The gods raise men high only to enjoy the fall. The next morning, he rode out not to celebrate, but to end it. The plain shimmered under the noon heat. Both armies waited uneasy as Hector stepped forward in his chariot and raised his spear. His voice carried over the distance. Send your best against me. Let one duel decide what 10,000 deaths cannot. Agamemnon hesitated. His pride told him to go. His reason told him to find someone else. Finally, Ajax stepped forward, massive, grim, unshaken. The duel that followed carved its own place in the memory of the world. 2 giants colliding beneath an unblinking sky, their bronze shields ringing like thunder. They fought until dusk turned everything red. And when the sun fell, both men stood bleeding and alive. They parted with nods, warriors recognizing the other as the mirror they'd been taught to hate. That night, as the wounded groaned and the fires burned low, Achilles sat by the sea, far from the noise. The surf broke around his feet, whispering secrets older than men. Patroclus found him there, quiet, distant. They're dying out there, he said. Without you. Achilles didn't look up. Then they will learn why they needed me. But the sea had its own voice that night, soft, insistent. The tide rose higher than usual, washing over Achilles' footprints before he could take another step. Some said it was Thetis, his mother, calling him back from pride's edge. Others said it was the gods reminding him that even heroes are grains of salt in their design. Days turned into weeks. The Trojans grew bold, pressing the Greeks to the edge of their ships. Arrows rained like wasps. Fires licked at the masts. Panic clawed through the ranks. In one desperate council, Odysseus said the words no one else dared. Bring him back. They found Achilles alone, sharpening his spear. He didn't rise when they entered. Odysseus spoke first, his tone a careful mix of plea and strategy. If Troy burns, your name burns with it. If it stands, your glory dies here on this shore. Achilles smiled faintly, then let it stand. But fate was already moving quietly through the camp. Patroclus, unable to watch his brothers fall, made a choice that would tear open the world. He donned Achilles' armor, bright as sunrise, and led the Myrmidons into battle. The Greeks roared as if the god of war himself had returned. The Trojans faltered, believing the unstoppable had rejoined the fight. Hector met him in the chaos, not knowing who hid beneath that golden helm. The clash was brief, desperate, perfect. When the dust cleared, the armor lay broken and Patroclus bled out on the plain, whispering Achilles' name into the sand. The news reached the camp at dusk. Achilles said nothing. He simply stood motionless as the light drained from the world. The men around him waited for an order that never came. Finally, he turned to the sea and screamed, one sound long and raw that carried across the waves and into Troy itself. Mothers there woke in terror, thinking it the voice of some god who had lost his child. That night, Achilles returned to battle, not for glory, not for empire, but for something older and far darker. His armor replaced, his eyes hollow, his hands steady. When he found Hector on the plain, the world seemed to stop spinning. The duel was not beautiful. It was punishment. When it ended, Hector's body lay in the dust, and the hero who once fought for honor now dragged the corpse of his enemy around the city that had loved him. But here's what no one expected. The gods did nothing. No thunderbolt, no omen, no hand from heaven to stop him, only silence heavy and complete. By dawn, even Achilles seemed to hear it. He stood beside the body, breathing hard, sweat streaked with blood and ash. Somewhere behind the walls, Priam wept for his son. Somewhere above them, Apollo turned his face away. The war had lost its shape. It was no longer about Helen or oaths or even pride. It was about momentum, the kind of fury that cannot stop without destroying what it began for. And as the sun climbed over the smoke-stained horizon, a whisper moved through the Greek camp, one no soldier dared to speak too loudly. If even Achilles can bleed for grief, who will bleed for him when his time comes? The question hung in the air like ash, and on that shore of iron and ghosts the sea kept whispering to the dead. The night the gods went silent, there are wars that roar and wars that whisper. After Hector's death, Troy became a city of whispers. Its gates still stood, its walls still gleamed beneath the sun, but inside the air was wrong. The laughter had gone thin. Mothers no longer sent sons to the ramparts with pride, only silence. Even the birds that had nested along the battlements seemed to have flown elsewhere, as if the gods themselves had packed up and left. Hector's body was returned at last, brought home by a king's courage and a father's tears. Priam walked alone into the enemy camp to beg for his son. The guards had wanted to stop him, but something in his face made them step aside. Achilles sat by his fire when the old man entered. For a moment, no one breathed. And then the warrior who had killed a nation's hope looked into the eyes of the man who had given that hope birth. And both understood that grief speaks a language older than war. Achilles handed over the body without a word. For 12 days the armies did not fight. They buried, they burned, they wept. Smoke rose from both camps and met in the sky like two hands clasping in uneasy truce. But peace is a fragile thing and men are impatient. When the ashes cooled, the killing resumed. The Greeks, worn and restless, turned to the only man left who could outthink despair, Odysseus. He walked among the tents like a shadow, speaking softly to captains who no longer believed in victory. He saw it in their eyes, the fatigue, the doubt, the hunger. We cannot break their walls by strength, he told them, so we must break their faith instead. And so began the quiet war. At night, small fires burned where they shouldn't. Supply wagons disappeared. Rumors spread through Troy that some of its own merchants were trading with the Greeks, selling grain and secrets. The city began to eat itself from within. The priests read omens that no longer made sense. Birds flying backward, dogs howling at midday. Even the statue of Apollo in the temple cracked down its face after a storm, as if the god had frowned too hard. Most people never knew this detail. During those last months, Troy was not conquered by soldiers first, but by silence. The songs stopped. The markets thinned. The air grew heavy with waiting. Achilles, too, was changing. Since Hector's death, he fought less, spoke little, and wandered the beach at night as though looking for something he could not name. He had begun to dream of the river that runs through the underworld, where all oaths go to drown. Sometimes he woke to find his armor gone dull, as if even bronze mourned. One morning, a prophet from the camp came to him, a boy, trembling, eyes wild. "Lord Achilles," he said, "your time is close. The gods have chosen the hour." Achilles laughed, though it sounded like breaking glass. "They've chosen every hour since I was born," he said. "Let them keep one." But the prophecy clung to him like smoke. He rode harder, fought longer, daring fate to find him. And it did. In the chaos of another day's battle, an arrow cut through the din, swift and sure, guided by a hand that should not have missed and a god that should not have cared. It found the one place where his armor did not guard, the heel, small and soft, the forgotten scar of his making. Achilles fell without a sound. Some say the sky dimmed, others that the sea turned red. The truth is simpler. A man who believed himself untouchable finally learned that all legends bleed. When the news reached the camp, it struck like thunder over water. The Myrmidons carried their leader's body back, faces blank, as if grief had turned them to stone. Agamemnon stared in disbelief while Odysseus bowed his head. "The war," he said quietly, "has lost its fury, but not its end. And this is where everything changed, because while the Greeks buried Achilles with honor, another story began in the shadows. Paris, the prince whose desire had ignited the world, now moved through Troy like a ghost of his former self. His city hated him as much as it had once celebrated him. His father's eyes no longer held pride. Even Helen could not meet his gaze for long. Guilt had made him desperate, and desperation made him foolish. He sought the same god who had blessed him once, Apollo the archer, to grant him vengeance. Some say the god whispered back. Others say the whisper was his own madness. Whatever the truth, he took the bow again. Days later, his arrow found Achilles. And with that single act, Paris sealed not just the warrior's fate, but his own. The Greeks, robbed of their hero, turned to Odysseus once more. "We've bled too long," said Menelaus. "If we can't win by strength, we'll win by deceit." Odysseus nodded slowly. "Then let us give them what they most desire," he said. Peace, but fate had something else planned. That night, Under a thin moon, Odysseus stood before a huddle of craftsmen and spoke of wood, wheels, and patience. He drew the outline of an idea in the dust, a gift so grand, so foolish that only exhaustion could make it believable. His men looked at him as though he'd lost his mind. "A horse?" one muttered. "We are soldiers, not carpenters." Odysseus smiled. "Then tonight you will learn to be both," and so, while Troy mourned one prince and Greece mourned one god of war, the true shape of victory began to rise from timber and deceit. The gods, once loud and meddling, grew silent. Perhaps they had tired of choosing sides. Perhaps they watched, curious to see how far mortals would go without them. By the time dawn came, the sea was still, the fires cold. The body of Achilles lay beneath a mound of earth high above the beach, marked only by his shield, a mirror catching the first light. Men gathered around it, quiet, hollow-eyed. Odysseus watched the horizon where the faint outline of Troy shimmered in the heat. "We will not storm those gates," he murmured. "We will be invited in." And somewhere beyond the dunes, in the city of gold and grief, Helen stood on her balcony, staring at the same sea. She could not hear the hammering, but somehow she felt it, a pulse steady and growing like the heartbeat of something monstrous waiting to be born. The sky was clear, the winds gentle, but beneath that calm, destiny was already shifting its weight. The gods no longer spoke. The heroes had all burned, and on both sides of the war, the silence before the final deceit began to spread like frost across a battlefield. What happened next? No historian expected. The wooden silence, it began with a disappearance. When dawn broke over the plain, the Greeks were gone. The camp that had thundered with hammers and war cries for 10 years now lay empty, its fires cold, its beaches scarred only by footprints and ash. The wind moved through the tents like breath through ribs, whispering over shields abandoned in the sand. From the walls of Troy it looked like a miracle. Trumpets sounded. Scouts were sent. None found resistance. Only one thing remained. Massive, towering, impossible. A wooden horse half the height of the city gate, carved from the same pine that once held up Greek ships. Its head bowed slightly, its flanks glinting in the sunlight. A gift left behind by enemies who had vanished like smoke. Troy had never seen such a sight. Crowds gathered before the gate, murmuring like waves. Some laughed, some crossed themselves against evil. Priam was carried out in his litter, wrapped in furs, eyes narrowed with disbelief. "They've sailed home," said one voice. "They've surrendered," said another. And then, as always, came the voice that would decide everything. "Bring it inside," said Paris. There was hesitation, even fear. Cassandra, the daughter cursed with foresight, shouted from the walls, her hair wild, her eyes burning. "Do not touch it. Burn it now." Her voice cracked against the wind. No one listened. They never had. The priest Laocoon strode forward, muscles tight, his sons at his side. "My king," he said, "this is no offering, it's a trap. The Greeks leave gifts only when their hands are full of daggers." He hurled his spear at the wooden beast, and the iron tip struck deep with a hollow clang. The sound echoed like something inside the horse had flinched. The crowd froze. But the gods, or the storytellers who loved their irony, had other plans. From the sea rose 2 serpents, monstrous and red as rust, thrashing through the surf. They struck fast, coiling around Laocoon and his sons, dragging them under before the people's eyes. The screams died, the foam turned red, and in that awful stillness, a single truth spread. The gods themselves had punished doubt. And so, before sunset, the gates of Troy opened. The horse was hauled inside with ropes and songs. Children danced. Women scattered petals. The priest declared the omen favorable. As night fell, the city that had endured a decade of siege gave itself permission to breathe again. Fires blazed in every courtyard. Music spilled from the palace. For the first time in 10 years, Troy celebrated. But here's the shocking truth. Victory often sounds like laughter right before the scream. When the moon climbed high, the streets grew quiet. The last cups were emptied. The songs slurred to whispers. One by one, torches guttered out. The city slept. And in the silence, something inside the horse began to move. A wooden panel creaked. Then another. A hand, slick with sweat, found the edge of moonlight. Odysseus was the first to emerge, his face pale, his breath measured. Behind him came the others, men chosen not for size or rank, but for patience. Their armor was wrapped in cloth to muffle the sound. They climbed down the ropes and dropped into the sleeping heart of Troy. Most people never knew this detail. There were fewer than 40 men inside that horse. 40 shadows against 10,000 sleeping souls. They moved fast. The guards at the gate never even raised a cry. Throats cut before dream could become awareness. The locks were pulled. Outside the walls, across the darkened plain, fires flashed. The signal. From the horizon, black sails rose like a second dawn. The Greek fleet had not gone home. They had only hidden behind a nearby island, waiting for this single moment. The oars bit water like teeth. The ship surged forward, silent except for the rhythm of vengeance. Inside the city, the alarm came too late. The first scream broke near the temple, then another by the market. Soldiers stumbled from their homes half-armored, still drunk with celebration. Arrows hissed down narrow streets. The smell of pitch and burning wood filled the air. Paris woke to chaos. The palace windows glowed red, the corridors filled with smoke. He ran to the courtyard, searching for Helen, calling her name until his voice cracked. When he found her, she stood among the flames, silent, her face unreadable. "We can still run," he said. She shook her head. "There's nowhere left." Priam tried to rally the last defenders from the steps of his hall, but death had already crossed the threshold. Neoptolemus, Achilles' son, wild-eyed, blood-stained, stormed through the doors. The old king rose, trembling, to face him. "You killed my father," said the boy. Priam's answer was a whisper lost to time. The sword fell, and somewhere near the citadel, Aeneas carried his father through the smoke, guided by omens only he could see. He would live to found another city far away. But Troy, the city of gold, the dream that refused to die, was ending. The horse burned first, collapsing inward with a groan like a dying god. Roofs fell, towers crumbled, and the river choked on ash. The night became a single endless scream. By dawn, the sun rose over silence again. The sea was red. The wind carried the smell of ruin. The Greeks walked among the ruins like men searching for meaning in what they had done. Odysseus, standing amid the smoke, looked toward the temple and whispered, "This is what victory sounds like." But fate had one more whisper left. As the Greeks prepared to sail home, a storm began to gather far off the coast, thunder rolling over the waves, low and endless. Some said it was Poseidon avenging his city. Others said it was the sound of history closing its first great chapter. The sails trembled, the ships creaked, and for a heartbeat, it felt as if the sea itself refused to let them leave. And somewhere deep beneath the ash, beneath the broken stones of Troy, a single ember still glowed, refusing to die, because stories, like cities, never truly fall. They wait, and one day, they rise again,